That's good.
That's it. You did it.
It's good back to Zoom.
We're good to go.
We will start again. So let's call this meeting to order. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda as it was presented?
I have nope.
Okay. Any public comments? Do we know if anybody's out there?
Charles would check the gallery. I didn't see anybody in there earlier.
There's nobody in there now either.
Okay, we only have that written comment.
We have the written comment, which I hope people had a chance to read.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions or anything? If not, we will just accept that.
Mhm.
Do we need to vote on that or anything?
Nope,
No, just
nope.
accept it, public comment. Okay, people had a chance to review the meeting minutes. Any additions or corrections or deletions or comments? Hearing none, do we have someone?
I'm happy to move that.
David move the motions. Donna would probably be happy to second them.
Oh, yeah.
All in favor of accepting the minutes?
Aye.
Okay. Since it passed unanimously, that means nobody is opposed. All right. Whipping through stuff here. New business, strategic planning.
Right, so
Urban
this,
renewal
so
status.
we have quarterly meetings, and so in spring we look at the audit and finance issues. The July meeting is more focused on strategic planning and personnel issues. The fall meeting is the budget. 2, 3, and then we're back to meeting. Well, then what January meeting is independent contractors. So we look at the contractors and those kind of services. So this meeting is focused on strategic planning and personnel. I don't have a lot of personnel updates, but I do have information here about strategic planning, but I also want to make sure the committee is kind of aware of the urban renewal activities that are going on, because you only meet quarterly and it's sometimes a little, I feel like you don't have a lot of information sometimes that would be helpful. So wanted to update you on the current urban renewal projects that are underway right now. The biggest one, of course, is right next door to City Hall with the Green Street Garage redevelopment. That is advancing pretty much on schedule. So there's 2 components to that. There was the sale of the garage to a Vecino affiliate for the park, for vertically expanding the parking garage and including a conference center and affordable housing. That is still on schedule for opening in the first quarter of 2024. Although there was some supply chain issues that just came up. So, there may be, construction is hard to figure out deadlines being met nowadays. And then adjacent to it is the Ithacan project, where the city sold the IURA on behalf of the city sold the air rights to the Green Street Garage. And on the eastern section next to the Marriott Hotel, they are scheduled to open that project August 1st. So they are ready to go. They're currently removing the firewall between the center section of the garage and the two decks of parking that extend towards the Marriott. And that should be up and running by August 1. So we will have 479 parking spaces available downtown with 200 housing units at the Ithacan, of which 20 are going to be below market rate rental units. 180, and then we go back to the center section, 180 affordable units and a 56,000 square foot conference center. So the 479 parking spaces do not come inexpensively. It's very expensive to construct structured parking. The city is on the hook for a 30-year period of paying rent approximately $1.6 million every year to cover that development costs. So 479 spaces, 1.6 million. You can do the math, and we need over $300 per space per month to cover that, and we don't charge that much per space because the market wouldn't support $300. It does achieve, kind of shared public parking. It keeps our urban fabric walkable, and not everybody's not building their own surface parking lot like you see in some cities. So it's got a number of public advantages, but it is an expensive approach. So the city is, cognizant of that and thinking about it in terms of the Seneca Street garage, which is wearing out. And then the question is what, how many parking spaces needs to be there? So so overall, the project is achieving its goals and coming finally to the finish line soon.
So I'm curious if you would need $300 per space per month. What is it you usually get per space per month?
The monthly rate in the green garage currently is $105.
$105.
$105, yes.
So you're gonna subsidize every space
You
for
bet.
$200.
Well, the ideal in a parking,
do the math.
the ideal in a parking arrangement is to sell it to the hotel at night and sell it to the commuter during the day, and have it twice, but, you'd have to really be almost at full occupancy and, those things, so. That cost I cited is the construction cost. There's still operating costs of staff and maintenance and equipment. So it's not even, it's even more expensive than what I cited. So.
And how much life is left in Seneca? Because I always expect to come down like yesterday. I mean, it's been like 10, 15 years. since
Every
I've-
time you drive in it, you
Seneca was
hope
built
for one
about
more
the same
day.
time as a green.
Right,
garage.
right,
So
exactly.
it has had more kind of periodic investments in it to keep it going.
Right.
But I think as I understand it, 5 years is kind of the time frame that the city is thinking about in terms of.
And then replacement, or is the idea that we'll shift some of that parking over to green?
I think there wants to be an assessment of what is the demand. I
Yeah.
mean, so parking structures are so bulky and, lumpy in terms of their investment, and then they're there for 30 years. And if we have evolving technology for transportation, and alternatives, you don't want to overinvest in it and have it sitting there underutilized. On the other hand, it's vital to have sufficient means for people to get downtown, and
Right.
it's kind of a balance between how good of a transit system you have versus, the
How many
parking.
people are
supply.
coming to work?
But when Dan Kogan was chief of staff, he did a lot of analysis of saying, could there be a strategic way to better utilize on-street parking
Mhm.
as well, and really max that out before
Mhm.
we charge parking within like 3 or 4 blocks of the commons. After that, it's free.
Yeah.
You could in some ways license that parking or lease that parking or charge for that parking on a very cheap basis that's easy to use. And some people would probably choose that over a high parking rate.
You get into residential neighborhoods. And then
Well, you do get into the
You
issue,
get-
it was always this plan that you always leave at least 1 or 2 spots open on every block face when you devise the pricing or the regulatory schemes, because you're right, you don't want a lot of homes in Ithaca don't have driveways in the downtown area, so.
May I ask, have they solved the electric charger thing? Last time I asked you about it, they weren't quite sure what they were gonna charge, they didn't.
What has happened since that time is the director of parking and transportation, Eric Hathaway, has resigned to take a job with the federal government. And the city is searching and reorganizing that kind of position. And that would be the key person working on that issue. So there hasn't been a lot of progress on EV chargers in the city or in the garages, other than what we have
They
currently.
installed them in the garage, or did they did
They
not?
did not install in the garage yet. They have a set aside design. They have.
They have to.
Well, the Cuba garage has.
And Seneca has a couple.
And Seneca has.
Seneca has,
So it's just
But
like green.
green was, the electric system was designed to support it, but there isn't the portals or the actual charger components installed yet. And previously there was a discussion about should the city buy it and, charge and receive any revenue if there is revenue, or apparently there are a lot of firms that will install the equipment on your behalf and they'll charge. And so there was a debate about what's a better way to go, especially in an evolving technology, and one that we're not that good at. We don't specialize in it for certain.
Seneca has, most of them are Teslas, and there aren't that many Teslas, so there's
So
like,
true. I don't know. It's an
Two-
electric vehicle.
there are 2, one is with the Hilton, there's only 1 for cars that aren't Teslas. And believe me, it is,
Hard to get into that one.
well, it's hard to get in, but we all play nice there, so
Yeah.
you gotta run out and unplug your car the minute because somebody else needs it.
Is it
And in a garage that size to have
insufficient?
one for, when we're trying to get electric cars going.
Right.
That's why I was hoping there'd be,
I'll raise that question because I think it's kind of been sidelined, frankly.
it, And there's more and more electric cars. People just keep buying them. And so
Right.
it's just gonna become,
10-15% of.
yeah, a real issue. So,
So that's urban renewal project number one. Another one is the East Hill Fire Station project up in College Town. That was where the city asked the IRA to play a role in structuring the sale of that fire station in return for a sizable purchase price and parcels where the city could build a new fire station. So struck an agreement with 311 CA Associates, which was the developer who bought the adjacent Nines building. Phil Brzezinski has been a representative of that organization. And they acquired two parcels at the corner of Elmwood and Dryden, which the city found acceptable for location wise and suitability for a fire station. Went through a design process and got it approved and signed an agreement that in return for $5.1 million in cash and those parcels, the city would convey the fire station, the current fire station, to the developer upon completion of the new fire station. Everything was going swimmingly until the developer had trouble securing financing after the savings and loans and bank debacle on the West Coast and in New York City. All of a sudden, regional lenders pulled back. He actually was in a construction loan agreement with one of those lenders that were having problems. And so it created a hardship for him to close on the financing. Had he closed in the financing originally when we scheduled the closing, I'm not sure, we might have been in front of all that, but it didn't happen. So we've been working back and forth to figure out a method that could get this project completed. And Ari Levine at the city attorney has been very diligent in trying to structure something with 311 CA Associates. We think there is a new model in which basically the developer will convey the parcels to the city this fall, so that the city can start its construction project and won't ask for the $5.1 million until 2025, which gives him time to secure his financing. We get to develop our parking. If he doesn't come up with the cash price, then we don't sell him the fire station. Yeah, it's a very simplified approach to a much more complicated deal, but that's what we hope is going to happen so we can get this thing started, because time is money and escalation is increasing as we go on as well for the city. So originally the city was hopeful that it would have to come out of pocket for this new fire station, something like $2 million. It's going to be higher than that now because we have delays and construction costs are increasing in inflation, but still it's a strong deal for the city to get a new fire station because $5.1 million plus land for the fire station is a good price. So that project, we hope to move forward. And the agency is actually the agent exchanging property on behalf of the city. So that's our role with that. And Mariette Kelvin-Hayes, our city attorney, our IRA attorney, has been very involved in the mechanics, the legal mechanics. That's number two. So the third urban renewal project is Inlet Island. All these projects seem to have complications for some reason, or higher costs than anticipated. But we've reached conceptual agreement with Steve Flash and his development team which includes Ithaca Neighborhood Housing Services doing a 57-unit affordable housing project on Inlet Island. And Steve Flash and his development team would develop an extended stay hotel, which he calls a stay. He's got several names for it, but it's I forget what he called it last time, but basically
Hotel?
a hotel, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
which I think would be you could lease it by the month or you could lease it by the day or the night. So the whole process got a little bit halted when we decided that we needed to follow through on the DEC land transfer. They control the Coast Guard Marina parcel. And they want to facilitate dredging activity. We want to facilitate dredging activity. But we don't want to have a dredging activity occurring right in the middle of this project. So the suggestion was, working with DEC, is to swap land, that DEC would transfer ownership of that parcel to the IRA or city in return for a parcel of land of equal size or equal utility right next to the Route 89 bridge, which is kind of, because the bridge rises up, it's a little bit hidden, it's not an active zone area. And we got all the way through that into December with a conceptual term sheet that we're waiting to finalize when the regional director changed. And the new regional director came in as an interim position. It was the head of the central office essentially, and they didn't have much time for this little issue. So went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. We're still waiting for their response from my January 3rd letter saying, let's finalize the terms here. But they do promise to get back, and it seems like it's moving forward. But we've had probably a 6-month delay due to that. So otherwise, the development team is still in place, INHS is still in place. They're even timing, their application to the state for affordable housing grant funds. But if we don't get this thing moving pretty quick, they're going to lose their window for submission, because they have to have site control, legal site control before they can apply next June for affordable funding. So hopefully that will move forward in the next 2 months or
Is the
so.
new INHS director?
That is a current search undergoing.
Oh, it's just an interim?
There's an interim director, which is Patty Pelangeli, who is the finance director. But I don't believe she's seeking to be the executive director on a long-term basis. So those are
It's
the.
Johanna.
Oh,
She's gone. She's at the trust
she's over the
company.
trust company, yeah, right. Oh, I should say, the final one that was in progress was the end of Cherry Street, which was the parcels where Emmys was originally gonna go.
Yeah.
And then we entered into an exclusive negotiation approval with John Guthridge of Urban Core, or maybe he called himself Urban Core there or something, one of the affiliates of Urban Core, to do a hospitality and beverage manufacturing and retail project. He was talking kind of with a brewer and a cidery and kind of a unique kind of hospitality model. He recently, in the last 2 months, notified us that we couldn't proceed with that project until he knew what the city's plans were for encampment policy, citing that a hospitality industry
What policy?
encampment.
I said cabin.
That a hospitality business
Correct.
is so dependent on social media reviews that if there was negative reviews, it would undermine its viability. So he wanted to understand what the framework was, and of course, the city is currently discussing its policy, but doesn't have is gathering public input on a draft policy right now, which will come back to the planning ED committee in August. So those are the updates on the renewal projects that are kind of in play right now.
Okay.
All right. Are there ones coming up that you see in the near future?
At this moment, I think what the Economic Development Committee suggested regarding the end of Cherry Street, they had a discussion about should we try to remarket it? Should we go out for other developers? And they decided they too wanted to get some stability about what is the policy in terms of the use of surrounding lands, in terms of homeless encampments, and the city's approach to the whole issue.
What happened to the Emmys?
Emmys found out that the soil in that area was going to require a premium for construction and require more time.
Gotcha.
And they were very concerned about the timeline. I'm not sure they were as much concerned about the extra cost, because we told them up front it was
Right.
financial. But they also didn't envision, I think, when they started looking at the site, that they would have this, apparently they get honey by the palletful or something
Yeah,
like that. And their designer said, well, you have to really plan for that kind of a heavyweight load, and especially if you're gonna stack things or something.
Yeah.
So they ended up in out on Route 13 off of not Warren, but Henshaw. And they're operating up there, and they found a ready to go kind of site that was underutilized and are doing well there.
Yeah, makes sense.
And they do a little transit, a little shuttle bus to get people from downtown, some of their employees downtown out there.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So doing well.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions on anything else?
No, you did a great job of making that stuff very clear.
Mhm.
Thank you. All right, city transition to city manager / council form of government update.
Just wanted to make this guy, I don't have a lot of depth on this, just, we are in the transition to that occurring on January 1st. And that will change things in terms of the chief administrative officer for the city will no longer be the mayor, will be the city manager. It's not as well aware, working on it as a council level. For the agency, there aren't a lot of direct implications for this change. Just want to make that clear. The mayor, by law, the mayor appoints the IRA members. The mayor is a member of the IRA. It does, that the mayor could appoint the city manager to be a member of the IRA or something like that. But there's no direct, automatic change occurring there. I just wanted to, that's the main thing I wanted to point out is we'll probably be observing and, working with the city manager.
Are
But
they, is there a search right now? Is it on?
the city has hired a search firm, and they're trying to pin down the salary wage that they will
I was
offer.
reading that.
And I think that's part of the, they want to know that before they go out too far or start soliciting candidates. But we got time, getting closer.
Yeah, I mean, searches take longer than,
Always.
yeah, than you
Especially
think.
if the first one's not successful.
Well, the labor
Well-
market's so crazy right now.
And I always say, if you, at a certain level, if you're gonna hire somebody, that person probably needs to give wherever they are now,
Some notice.
a couple months notice. If you're at that level, you can't just give 2 weeks notice somewhere. Maybe, depending on who it is.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And whether they've been invited to explore the retirement program.
I mean, I would be here, they could be, yes, between jobs, it just depends. The consolidated plan development report, the 2000.
Again, along the lines of
24,
strategic planning,
27.
every 5 years, we develop a consolidated plan, which is more or less the HUD entitlement grant strategic plan. And then we have every single year an action plan to implement that. So this is the year where we have to start developing another 5-year action plan. What I included in your packet were the goals from the last plan, consolidated plan, and then a list of priority needs. And if a project that we want to fund has to meet one of the priority needs, if it's not listed as a priority need, then it's not eligible for inclusion for funding with CDBG or home funds. And the goal statements are, we also have to show that every activity, advances one of the goals. So that's the framework we're working with. We make the goals very general, as you see there, expand and improve affordable housing, expand economic and employment opportunities, strengthen neighborhoods, increase physical and economic mobility, and meet essential needs for food, shelter, and safety. But this is an opportunity to look at, are there new things, new initiatives we want to think about, different focuses, or items that are not listed on the priority community development needs that should be included there. They don't have to be high priorities, they used to be listed as high or low. And in the past, the agency has used that list to say, we can't fund everything. Let's try to focus on what we do well and where there are not other funding sources for. But we tend to not, because we don't know who's going to come applying to us each year, we try to keep our options open at the same time, which is kind of countervailing forces here but we don't want to have people apply to us if we're not seriously about funding their projects. Somebody says, there's been discussions about agriculture kind of uses. Is that our thing, or is that somebody else's funding thing? Those could be the kind of questions we could ask ourselves in this priority list. At one time, we thought childcare was not a high priority anymore because we had a lot of activities going on, people were getting grants, but many of them had a hard time getting into implementation and operating. So then we went back and added it back in the middle of a 5-year plan. So you can amend this plan in the 5 years. It's a little bit of a hassle. It's got to come back to council and it's got to get approved by HUD again. But really what I wanted to just give you an opportunity to say, are there issues we want to try to make sure we bring into the discussion, or new needs that we should focus on or prioritize that we aren't doing now, or that the framework doesn't really manage well? Some people have raised equity questions. Should equity be central here in some way? What about gentrification and the reaction to gentrification pressures? They can fall under these categories as we try to address some of these now. But I mean, this is an opportunity to say, this is going to be our focus for the next 5 years. If we wanted to bring up a new issue or a new need. Sorry.
I have a few ideas. I think we need to continue to support programs that provide some kind of vocational training to prepare people for jobs that, in which they can support themselves. And that probably entails some kind of collaboration with the trade unions. I would love to see, and I don't know how this would work, but I would love to see some kind of incentive program to promote home ownership in the city. I think we have a lot of large older homes that could be converted to duplexes. But I'd love to see them owner occupied. I have no idea how to achieve that, but I think it would be wonderful if we could. Or any other kind of incentive to promote ownership, like converting dilapidated vacant homes or anything like that. So it has to be comprehensive. And I would love to see some kind of micro zoning or HUD proposal for a tiny home park. I mean, I envision it in Marcos Flats, but that doesn't belong, but that belongs to the school district. It would have been lovely to have it down there. Now we're having it next to, across from Argos, you know, where they put up that big apartment building.
Oh, yeah.
That would have been a perfect tiny home village.
Even along the river, Creek.
Along the creek, yeah. Yeah. And then I have kind of a silly idea. We need an urban dog park in this city. There's no fence. We have lots of underutilized urban park land, but none of it is totally fenced off. And I think it would help make the city more urban, more walkable, more community oriented. Probably wouldn't take much money. And I know probably wouldn't get much support, but I'm still putting it out there.
Yeah, parks are an eligible use of CDBG funds.
Ineligible?
Is eligible
Oh.
if they are located in a low mod neighborhood.
Oh,
Service
okay.
areas low mod, so all the flats, for example, would be eligible areas. But if once you get up East Hill and Upper West Hill, they would not probably
That's
be
fine.
eligible. So McDaniel Park and West Hill, I don't think would meet the criteria as being
Right,
in a low mod neighborhood,
plus that, right,
which is a nice, I don't know if you've ever been to McDaniel Park,
Yes.
but it's a nice kind of private park, which
Yeah.
only has a weird access, narrow
It's
access
weird.
point.
It's probably called a walking park. I mean, you don't walk by it. You hardly even know it's there when you walk by it.
Yeah, it's good,
It's on a hill.
good size, yeah. Okay, those are great, good input, and, you know, we'll be discussing the same thing with the agency, so anything you bring forward. You know, they
So
can-
all these things in the 2019 solid plan priority needs, are those all eligible things? And you
Yep.
just list them all?
Yep,
Those are
things that are not eligible, are things that are not on this list.
like, okay,
And that's-
everything on that list is eligible.
Everything is eligible.
I must admit, I
The same
was,
with this one,
Okay,
this is,
sorry.
sometimes I go back and forth between, is it good to put everything that's eligible on and that way, if somebody comes up with an idea, you can probably fit it somewhere?
Mhm.
Or is it better to say, okay, we have limited funds? And because, in that you could say the priority level, though, we do make a lot of things high priority. Is if it's better to say, okay, for the next 4 years, we're gonna concentrate on these 5 high priority
it
things.
gets more focused on those and
And-
more funding
and-
for those, yeah.
You know, and you could say that across the board on lots of things, and you go back and forth, you know, what is the best way to really make an impact if we're gonna. So,
Particularly funding is limited in those categories, if you see the code called PS, that's public services.
right,
Because we can only spend 15%
Right.
of our CDBG award, which works out to like a little under 100,000 per year on any public service, so. If there was a clear focus that, yes, we need a lot of, you know. The high need is in immigrant services and the lower need is in senior services, and you know, maybe it would be the time to say, okay, for the next 5 years, we're gonna pull senior services off. Just to be clear to people that don't bother applying to us for that,
Right.
because we're already oversubscribed, you know, and we have other higher priority needs.
and I'm sure that's part of what you do is look, where is the funding, because it's. Anyone who's ever dealt funny knows that the, you know, mood of the country will shift, you know, at one point it's all youth services, then it'll be senior services, then it'll be homeless services, then it'll be,
Yeah.
it goes back and forth, and or childcare can be big and then all of a sudden become a, so. It does seem awfully large.
It's a long list.
Um,
And it kind of tracks the fact that the agency puts out a request for funding proposals. Any application that is eligible is, can apply, and we don't drive the projects, the applicants drive
right,
projects, other than the IURA selects what they think are the most impactful and successful projects. But we don't give much guidance, in terms of
so
that.
maybe we shouldn't have so many high priorities. Maybe we keep them all, but make.
Right, and then within that, they can be eligible as long as they're low, priority is still eligible.
Right.
But we could use the high and low as a way to
As a
say,
way to justify.
hey, we really want categories here.
Here, yeah,
Senior housing is a need, but it's not a high need compared to some of the other things, that's actually what we do have there is we do have youth, homeless, senior, mental
Right.
health, and domestic violence, all as low priority needs.
What is blight removal?
Slums, homes that are abandoned, underutilized.
So that is one of the things I mentioned.
Yeah, right, yeah,
Oh, okay,
yeah.
good. So
It could also be trash strewn, vacant lots and things like that, too. Anything that really brings down the neighborhood.
um,
No action is needed. I just wanted to make sure you had a
Right,
chance to
that we-
discuss this and think about it if you wanted to. We can revisit this again in the fall. And he says, embarking on the outreach and consultation process for this plan, it has to be adopted by next, well, basically March, April. Then we bring it forward to common council.
so I have another crazy idea
Okay,
that nobody will like even.
okay. What's that?
What would it take to implement a civilian conservation corps in Tompkins County? You provide 3 meals, a bed, an opportunity to learn skills, an opportunity to improve infrastructure to people who otherwise have no income or home.
I'm trying to think whether there's some resources. I mean, you always need an agency who wants to implement that. And you're thinking about somebody who, the target audience would be people who have graduated from high school, or would be like a summer program?
Oh, adults,
Adults,
Yeah.
okay, at least, okay.
Yeah. Like the CCC,
Yeah,
only for women too.
CCC, they put one. I know
I
that.
don't, so,
Yeah, right, I think.
probably not back then.
Yeah. When we listed here is something to think about. I mean, it's probably not an easy thing for us to fund unless we link it into some of the other things, but it does fall into the same kind of work experience,
Mhm.
job creation, job placement, could result in job placement.
and on house homelessness.
Yes, I know, but yeah, a CCC needs to have some sort of an ongoing stream of income to pay stipends, basically, right? That's a pretty expensive, that's always been the expensive place, so Finger Lakes Reuse has done some of those programs where they pay stipends for people to work there for a certain period of time, which might be the kind of go to them and say, how has that worked? What have you learned about it? What doesn't work? What does work? Because it's kind of in some ways a little urbanized minor scale program. It's not that unusual. They provide a lot of supports for for people. So and I think some of the reentry kind of programs might also have components of that as well. And then you need to have access to sites to go, you're gonna improve parks or work on agriculture or flood mitigation. It could be another big growing area of demand. You need to have some collaboration at, kind of the county and level government.
Right.
So,
Sure. I mean, it's interesting, you made me think about what, one of the reasons, of course, I came up with depression is because nobody had jobs.
yeah.
What is the employment rate? I mean, before nobody could find people for jobs. Is that getting better or worse or how about?
Yeah,
That's what I was wondering too. I
Yeah,
think a lot
it's-
of the entry level. Right.
Is it still?
It still is from what we hear. I mean, the city has a lot of open positions. And again, you know, it tends to be the positions that that are not available for remote work tend to be harder to fill. You know, you have to be at a work site to do the job. And the remote is easier to fill, but you end up with somebody who living in Buffalo and coming in once in a while.
And who would that be?
I wasn't even thinking of Charles. That was a transition. But no, INHS, for example, has an employee with that's what I was thinking in my head. But they hired somebody who lives in Buffalo and is one of their housing developers. And they have somebody from California, and that's but those jobs can be done relatively well
Yeah.
remotely.
Yeah, but repairing bridges
Yeah.
can't be.
Yeah, it is hard, it is a tight market still, you will hear from people, and particularly in the kind of social services area. I mean, trying to find people working in residential management, social, any of the social service kind of agencies are having, not-for-profits are very stressed.
Somebody got a signing bonus, like you never saw that in human services.
Yeah.
Signing bonuses,
So-
it was.
And there is some sort of an effort, I'm not sure, I guess I need to get a little better informed about, how TC3's initiatives to try to develop programs to connect people in the trades. And so I think it's a matter of collaborating a little bit with other agencies that have done a little bit of a deeper dive in this issue than we have so far.
That actually, not to, is probably a good thing to look into when you're looking at this plan,
Mhm.
is because we have had kind of emphasis on employment programs.
Mhm.
Is that under the current job situation? How are those programs even doing? Because I know a couple of them are having trouble finding people to participate in programs.
Oh, you're right, yeah,
So.
right.
Because people can go out and
They have other options, yeah.
I was just talking to somebody yesterday, hired a teenager to watch their puppy with the dog that they allow. The dog sleeps most of the time, but and she said, well, what do you want paid? Well, minimum wage in the state is now this, and I can get a job at McDonald's for this, so it would be, it's like, you can do there.
$14.50 is minimum wage, but
Negotiate,
McDonald's is paying
which is,
$18
yeah, I
an
mean,
hour or
you're
whatever.
paying-
Dunkin' Donuts.
I don't even know, somebody asked me what babysitters get paid now, and I was like,
Not 50 cents an hour.
what babysitters, I got paid 33 cents when I babysat, but it's 80 maybe. I said, I have no idea.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's something to look into, I think, how those programs are going.
So
Is that it for that?
that's good input, yes. Good start. Continue that.
Hey, review of the IRA mission statement.
So at the last meeting, we mentioned that maybe it's time to take a relook at the mission statement. You see the mission statement that it was adopted in 2011. It served us well, but it has never really been re-examined with any, any sense of anything that has happened in the last decade. So what I did is I pulled a lot of other mission statements I could find, a lot of urban renewal agencies, which tend to focus on that very specific urban renewal function of, working on slum and blight issues. And then some community development agencies, which tend to be a little bit more like administering grants, like a HUD grant, which we do a little bit of both, of course. And then I included the city of Ithaca's commitment to equity and justice statement that was recently adopted by the city. And then a whole bunch of Denver stuff, because Denver has a lot of information on the webpage about the urban renewal process, and it's fairly different than all the other ones, because you start to see a pattern with the other ones where you read it over and you say, oh, it's just like the one I read before, feel to it. But Denver was quite different. They're an authority, not a agency, and apparently it's quite a political organization there, but they've undertaken some huge urban renewal projects like the old Stapleton Airport, which got converted to a new neighborhood when Denver built their new airport 20 years ago.
I like the current one.
And so it's a chance to review and take a look at this to see if there's a need for any changes or any updates or new kind of approaches to it. This is a chance to review it. Or there's sections.
I have
from
that.
You see that you liked,
Nothing present, which reminds me how long I've been sitting in this committee, because I remember doing the last one.
yes. you did. You did.
It's nice and concise. It's pretty clear. It is clear. It's nice and concise. Some of the others are pretty wordy.
Right. Some of the others are. Mission statement isn't supposed to include everything you do and what you do.
Yeah,
It's like, that's something different. I did like some of the wording of the US Department of Housing of HUD,
Mhm.
because they actually do. Use words like strong, sustainable, and inclusive. Communities, because one thing I noticed about ours is we don't have anything about. We don't have anything about equity, we don't think about inclusion and about trying to. And take into account that, you know, some populations have not been able to share, you know, equally and
Right, yeah.
and the. Part of our job to recognize that. So I don't have the words exactly, but.
Right, and we worked on some of those issues with the affirming fair housing plan, recognizing that certain protected classes have had disadvantages historically, and those disadvantages have continued because, you know, in terms of home ownership, you know, some certain families were not able to accumulate capital and others were, and that made a big difference over the long term. So I mean, that,
There's an unfortunate typo in the HUD one.
it's not-
Sustainable communities free for discrimination.
Oh, is that right? That's my fault.
Probably.
Yes, it is.
It's also, I'm sorry, I'm not picking on you, Judith. I love the fact that the city of Elmira does their work for Ithaca.
Oh, did I?
So it's like, let's see what that is.
That's me.
Elmira's doing it for
I tried to cut and
behalf of the
paste these.
city of Ithaca.
I tried cut and paste them and it just didn't work. The formats were not working, so I had to type it. My head must have said that's.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
That's
after
funny.
decades of things.
Yeah. I see your point about the HUD one. That's good. We could sort of adapt that one, but
Agreed.
keep it short. Yeah.
I mean, what I like about the current ones, it's so pragmatic.
Yeah.
I mean, you always want it to be somewhat aspirational, but I like that it's kind of grounded in. You know, the actual activities of the agency, the
Yeah.
securing and managing of resources. But I agree with the inclusive. I think getting the word inclusive or inclusion in there in some ways will make sense. These days. Also, like in the HUD thing, the reference to quality of life.
Mhm. Yeah. Kind of have the same challenge that the CDBG program has, which is it's so broad in the categories it can fund, you know, housing, public facilities, public services. It's hard to define or measure it sometimes. And in some respects, it's our, you know, if we just did one thing, it would be a lot easier to write this, but that's why I think the current statement captures much of that. The criteria in our current statement about improving the social, physical, and economic characteristics is actually right out of state law for when an urban renewal agency can acquire and dispose of property. We're supposed to show. So it's kind of that showing that we're there's a net improvement to our activity, I guess, right? We don't enter into things with, you know, that might be, you know, we're balancing out, you know, there might be some small negatives, but overall, it's a great benefit to the community. I know when I ran this around the staff a little bit, they liked the idea also that equity component somehow being incorporated or inclusion, or addressing the fact that we're not, you know, recognizing that past urban renewal nationwide has displaced people, has changed, you know, focused on lower income neighborhoods that, you know, but we're not that urban renewal agency kind of an argument that's the old school. Well, this Ithaca did do the commons and do the Neptune tuning for transit area and what was Woolworths. Those were all areas that the urban renewal agency acquired property, demolished property, resold property. For the most part, there weren't concentrated low, moderate income residential communities. I mean, they're commercial, and often, the highways have not been that great of a partner for neighborhoods, as you could say. So, but it wasn't cutting through a traditional neighborhood in those cases. But I don't know the history truly enough to know that there weren't, there probably were affordable apartments in, the second and third story of some of those buildings. And we reduced that supply by going through some of those projects. So we probably have some culpability too in that old style of urban renewal. But I think it's always hard to wordsmith these things. But I think identifying concepts you want to bring in, what makes it a lot easier to say if you want to somehow think about how we can wordsmith in.
I mean, you can do it as simple as like it says, after expanding, you put expanding fair and equal access to quality affordable housing. Or if you want to get into talking about using the resources of the IURA to mitigate past things, that will probably take an extra second to putting in. But then you're saying, we are going to take that in consideration.
Exactly, right.
That we're saying that our resources are we're gonna look at that.
We need to hold ourselves to it if we're gonna have it.
If we're saying we're gonna do that, that's
Yeah,
that's something that probably.
it's kind of the difference between saying we're gonna treat everybody equally versus we're going to acknowledge that there was some inequities and we're gonna focus our energies to try out. Having said that, a lot of federal law prohibits you prioritizing one group over another. Like if you have a house for sale that's been assisted with HUD funds, you cannot target it for a protected class and say, well, it's only eligible for protected classes. That would be a violation of fair housing, for example. But you can affirmatively market that property to groups that you would encourage to be the beneficiary of that. Right?
Yeah.
So that's the way traditionally people have addressed that concern is we'll go out and we'll try to drum up more interest in the neighborhood.
Yes.
We're serving maybe and say, hey, there's a home over here.
So can you add the word, legally, can you add the word historic after social, physical, and economic characteristics? Historic or historical?
What do you mean?
Well, some of the gentrification issues that have come up in discussion is that, for a number of reasons, that some of the traditional neighborhoods in the city are being destroyed, and I'm not saying it has anything to do with the urban renewal. I just wondered if that's one of the things you can't.
Yeah, what we hear a lot, of course, is people can no longer afford to live in neighborhoods they can historically were affordable. And it's that whole gentrification issue is, especially when it's community wide, it's hard to find solutions other than building, direct income limited affordable housing, like IHS has done through the neighborhoods and others. That's really the only effective tool we found is we have to build housing that is earmarked for protection for affordability. As moving against the economic forces of land and home values in Ithaca is an uphill battle. You just can't. It's like the issue we've tried in the past as a goal is to convert student housing in College Town to for sale family housing, but when the market is when the fire station is selling for $5.1 million, which is not a great building particularly, and it's only 9,000 square feet in size, it's hard to put together a deal that would convert student housing to single family home without somebody like Cornell or somebody really, pushing and supporting that kind of initiative.
Yeah, I fought for that argument 12 years ago.
It's just hard to get, you're swimming upstream, but
I like I keep this simple, and I like the idea of expanding access What did you say, fair and equitable access?
Fair and equal, I think. I
Fair.
remember.
Access to quality.
Quality affordable housing, and then leave it at that. I like that.
Okay, I have a word with expanding. Do we expand or do we create access?
Expanding. Because we already do it. Or promoting,
Yeah, we don't, I mean, we tried to stay away, I think, a little bit from saying the agency actually undoes these things, because we kind of facilitate things, we fund programs. We sell land for projects, we don't actually ourselves create them.
Yeah.
But that's maybe, you know, a language issue more than anything. But that might have been why we talked about expanding access rather than creating.
okay.
Another thing that jumps at me from that HUD statement is to use the word sustainable. And, you know, these days to have a mission statement that doesn't at least have a nod towards climate change and sustainability, I think it becomes outdated pretty quickly.
It's a good point. Technically, we could say it's part of the social, physical, and economic characteristics,
No, sure,
but it's not really called out there at all, right?
Yeah. I mean, again, it's a question of whether that's
Is that the priority?
a priority, right?
So what do you want next steps to be for each of us to play with it, or?
I love, you guys are probably the best members of the committees with language skills. This group is I have highly skilled in that area. I think playing with it would be great. I think we could also report out to the agency what are some of the concepts that were discussed and see for feedback and say, yeah, go ask the committee to work on that. But that might be another way to go, rather than spinning your wheels with perfect language and then having the agency say, well, that's not really perfect what I want. Cheyenne Osterich is the newest member, and she already expressed some interest in the mission statement. So it might be wise to come back to the full agency and say, we had a brief, discussion about it. We raised these issues that I've written down. We liked some of the language and some of these things that were pointed out. But trying to get it something that incorporates maybe recognizes the past inequities, the equity or future equity, the fair and equal language we just mentioned, sustainability and inclusive communities kind of language.
I mean, when you look at the city of Ithaca's commitment to equity and justice statement, one of the things that has in there is using the equity lens to evaluate all decision-making processes.
And I don't know what that means, and I objected to including it.
I just read that. I'm not saying I know what it means, but I would read it as what we were talking about, as saying, when you make new decisions, does this,
What this
is it
impact?
fair in taking into consideration the inequities of the past?
Right.
And so I was thinking, if that is the city's thing, something should be in the statement of the IURA saying that they are also committed to doing that.
It was interesting that I had a very hard time finding that statement on the city website after it was recently adopted, like early spring. I said, like, where, it should be right there, right? I couldn't find
I'm sorry I interrupted you. I have.
it.
All right, so you're gonna ask them.
I think we'll
And
bring
then
it,
come
we'll
back to
bring it
us.
back to the full
It's,
agency.
I love the wordsmith.
You're good at it. And then if they say, yes, focus on those things, then we can then try wordsmithing those things in, those concepts.
Anything else on that?
Oh,
The IRS fiscal health report?
so again, this is kind of along the lines of strategic planning for the agency, looking at our finances going forward. And we're in a pretty good spot at the moment because we had all this COVID funding flow into us. But then when you step back and say, once that money is burned through in 2 years or so, what do we look like then? And I tried to point out in that memo, we've got a couple of things working against us. One is the HUD funding has been level and is not going up at all, and anywhere in the future that I can see on a regular basis. Actually, I mentioned that the House adopted a budget that would cut home by $1 billion of the 1.6 billion that's funded. The Senate has now passed their version, which keeps it level funding. So there's going to be this kind of, but neither of them are talking about increasing funding for home or CDBG. So, we'll be lucky if we stay level there. And over the, we peaked out in 2004 under George Bush Senior, Junior, I guess, when we were at $1.56 million of CDBG funds. Now we're at 700,000, a little under 700,000, and that's without inflationary costs, going on. So it's not, that's our bread and butter funding source for covering the 3.6 point person FTE staff. And what was 190 or 160,000 now, back when our budget was 320 was pretty good, but now we're at 400,000 because we have healthcare and wage increases and all the other things everybody else is facing. So that's the core problem really, is what was our chief funding source for administrative funding is not growing and it's not keeping up with inflation. But we've been pretty fortunate getting other things and covering things through. So that's one issue. We mentioned inflation, which was really high last year. Luckily, it's come down. So it's a little bit better off. Our health insurances have premiums, as everybody knows, has gone through the roof over the last 20 years. We're lucky, as I mentioned here, that most of the employees elect to not accept our health insurance. We go under dependents, in which case we then pay their out-of-pocket expenses up to a point where they could apply for reimbursement up to 75% of what they would be eligible to. And they find it as a good deal, and we find it's an excellent deal. So that's been a good way to provide high quality services, benefits at a reasonable price for us. That could change if we had new staff that all wanted to go through the IRA plan. That would have a big hit if all of a sudden a family is $33,000. So the employer, the IRA pays 80% of that, but still that's a lot of money. Then we had this new unanticipated expense of an audit expense this year. So we have to do our audit within 90 days of the end of our fiscal year. And we are a component of the city, but the city never even thinks about doing their audit within 90 days at the end of the year. So to meet our obligations for the Public Authorities Act, we have to ask the auditor to come in and do our books separately. What has happened historically is they've been happy to do that because book our accountant has everything ready for them. They come in for 1 week of work when they're done, and then that gets inserted into the city's audit when they get their audit done 9 months later, if we're lucky. But the city auditor has done that work and charged us a nominal fee to package it up for us separately, $900. This year we had to pay $11,500 because the city, the auditor has decided they're getting out of the municipal accounting business, at least the city of Ithaca municipal accounting business. And we didn't have anybody to go to because the city is in the process of hiring a new firm. And so we hired out Insero to do just our books. But it's still going to be part of the city's audit when they finish their audit. So that was an unexpected $11,000 increase that we didn't build into our budget, and one I'm hoping we don't have to pay for in the future. It doesn't help balance our books. And then the other final thing I wanted to pull together, and Chris Pruitt asked actually that there be some analysis of this, is when the IURA staff does work on city projects, are we compensated for it? And by and large, most projects we are. We build it in, we say we're incurring using our staff time, because every hour that we charge has to come from some source and have to track it. And if it's not working for CDBG, then we need to find another source for it. So by and large, we have structured things so that we don't end up having to eat that expense of that staff cost. But there's been a couple of projects that we haven't been able to figure out a way to get that incorporated. They're usually projects that don't have a revenue source attached to them. Like the city's happy to share resources when there's resources and revenue coming in, but when there's no revenue coming in, then it kind of gets assigned to us, and then we say, well, wait, we don't have where are we going to get the money for that? So examples of that are the encampment policy.
Yeah, you worked
for one. Yeah. Another one is the Restore New York grants, which we've been very successful as a community getting. They've included Ithaca Gun, the Press Bay Alley and Press Bay Court. We have just gotten 2 awards, one for the corner of South Cayuga and Green Street, right next to City Hall, for renovating for new housing in the upper stories there, affordable housing, as well as the Chainworks building, which is now called Southworks, which was Emerson before it. That grant source comes with a stipulation that the recipient grant, the grantee cannot charge an administrative fee to the developer. But we've historically always managed that for the city, so everything involved with that has no funding source, for example. And then Anissa was asked to work by the prior mayor on the 300 block of West State Street and to convene a group and work on a plan. There was no funding source identified for that. And you know, and all told, over like a 3-year period, it's about $94,000 that we can track in our time billing that we don't have any funding source for. And so we could go to the mayor and ask, or the common council and say, you know, we want fee for services. If you want our services, you should be paying for them. Or we could say going forward, we want that, or we could say that at minimum, we don't want that audit coming back to us again year after year, since we are part of the city. You know, having said all that, the city does provide a lot of benefits to the agency. They allow us to keep the administrative funds for CDBG and home. They give us free office space, free IT. You know, there's a lot of positive things, and we would not be as effective an organization if we weren't in the building next to the mayor and the planning director and all those things. So there's, you know, it's kind of a balance, but I guess what I'm calling out here is we're at a tenuous balance point where we're starting to tip negative and deficit in the future, and thinking of ways we can try to keep our budget balanced and keep our staff intact, because there's no downtime by our staff. Especially when Anissa's got to do, you know, the consolidated plan and the action plan every year. And we're trying to do the urban renewal projects. So pointing out that we're in a point of transition here, I guess, in terms of we are kind of like in a balanced budget this year. You know, we're okay this year, we're okay next year, but things are starting to degrade. I guess is the point there. And thinking about where are some areas where we can make difference. Another opportunity is we sell Cherry Street property or Inland Island property that can produce a lump sum, or we can sell the property and take a loan back as owner financing and create a stream of income, which has been what we've done historically to help build up an annual income flow. We have about $500,000 in our local fund, non-CDBG IURA fund, which is available for, we can't use it for grants or loans. I don't know if you remember, we have these restrictions on our uses of funds. Because our enabling legislation didn't authorize grants or loans, we can only make use of, we'll make grants or loans only with other people's money, basically, with HUD money, state money. But our own money, we can't do that with. So that 500,000 can be used for activities and staff. So it is kind of our cushion in the event that we start running into a deficit, but it's not exactly, that pool doesn't, I think we kind of hit a level on it. We were increasing it for a couple of years and now it's level. So if we start dipping into it, it's not going to get replenished in all likelihood. So that's why it's time to start thinking about what are some opportunities to increase revenues or decrease expenses. I'd rather increase revenues, but so that's what this memo is about.
So may I make a suggestion? Before I joined the IURA for all the time I was on Common Council, I didn't really know the precise relationship between the city of Ithaca and the IURA. So I'd like to suggest that you give a little presentation in one of the upcoming budget meetings so that everybody on Common Council knows what the relationship is and knows that the city can't drag you and Anissa in and out of these other things unless we're consciously aware that it's a trade-off between office space and internet access or something. So that everybody knows.
Right, that would be good. I mean, I think Lisa's talked about that with new council coming in,
Okay.
a major turnover of council
Yes,
members would be
right.
another opportunity, you know, when there's an orientation.
Yes.
To include that connection.
Right.
And maybe, yeah, and again, clarify, I mean, some of these initiatives we work on are things I think are very core to the agency's work. I mean,
Yes.
homeless housing
Yes.
and those kind of things.
Yes.
But if there's no funding source, we have to make a conscious decision.
Right.
Should we be doing them or
Right.
not? And if, and does the city support it? And if the city supports it enough, are they willing to put up
Right,
for
the
some
city
money?
wants to have
Yes.
participation and you're asking you to be the participant.
Right.
Right.
You're doing that.
Yeah, we have a mechanism for the city to pay us in which that we collect rents on behalf of the city and turn them over to the city, rents and loans.
Mhm.
So what we have done when we've had agreements in the past is we said, well, you know, Anissa incurred, 20 hours of work on that project, we're gonna take the equivalent of that and just withhold it in terms of the transfer of payment. And that's how we physically worked it. So it's been kind of invisible to everybody. I mean, it's been, usually there's in the resolution that's approved, it'll say, the IRA is authorized to, retain income to, pay itself for its work on this project. Yeah, so. I think-
I just want to say, this was great. This was a really well-written document and very, it's easy to follow. I would share this. It's,
Sure.
I just
Right.
was impressed by how you laid it all out.
Right.
And I think all your suggestions are good. I just, I thought they were.
Every one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly hope that very least that you could come under the city audit again, because $11,000 audit is what it's.
Yeah, I think
it's
that could be
been
just
up
a
in the
discussion with the chief administrative officer, and that'd be the mayor right now, or, to just say, this is part of the city's audit expense.
And that's a way the city could help support without. As part of the, I think that's the kind of the.
I'll share it with the IRA as well.
But I think it's really good. I think clarifying what you get paid for from the city and what you don't. At the very least, it'll make them think twice about saying,
Go do that.
Right.
oh, can you just go do this, or can you just go do that?
Right,
But it's unfortunate that there isn't. That's so restrictive that you have to, every minute has to be.
right. It's different from the planning staff because they have a salary and they do track, they track their time overall. They don't track it by project. We track it by project.
Yeah.
So that we can account for it to HUD as well as to ourselves, what we're doing. Yeah, so it's,
That gets so complicated.
I mean, because really we want, once you start pigeonholing and saying like, that's like a work rule, like I can't work on that, you don't want to be in that position. You want to support initiatives across the board that are improving the community. Restoring Your grant's a great grant to improve the community. It doesn't have direct revenue to the city. But it makes sure without Crest Bay Alley, we would have a different urban feel. Right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to be on my dog park committee?
I'd be happy to with the people service arrangement that we were
Yeah, right,
discussing.
exactly.
David, anything?
No, I mean, I just think that, I think large institutions and organizations for decades now have been moving more to this distributed kind of cost model, right? Where you're not just saying, well, we're kind of in it together. And so, but even within institutions like at Cornell or at Syracuse for that matter, it's about where the money's flow in and how the services that are provided and how you're paid for that. So I think, at least raising awareness, as you were saying, but then also saying like, we've got to get cleaner about how our expenses are being covered, right? If we're doing this for the city.
Right.
So I think most people will get that. It's kind of what we expect for a while.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Financial review.
So you should have the grant summary, a loan repayment summary, a lease repayment summary, Grants are rolling pretty well. We've had some good progress the last couple of months. We have a snapshot every June about our spend down of CDBG funds. If we don't meet it, they threaten to reduce our funding in future years. Actually, they threaten to make us go into a workout plan and then move that. And a lot of communities during COVID had a hard time spending down funds because programs and projects that had face-to-face interactions weren't operating. And so HUD said, you don't have to meet the requirement for this year, but then they said, starting this year, you did have to meet it. And so we were scrambling to get our spend down, meet the limit. So you basically can't have more than 1.5 times your most recent grant award unspent. You know, we don't actually collect all the grant funds. They're held by HUD, but we have access to them. So we did meet that standard with a little push from folks and to our grantees. They came through and vouchered, and we got expenses. We met that. So most of the grantees here are showing that they're on schedule here. We're not in any hardship scenario. There are a couple of projects that are slow that Denise is tracking, and there are a couple of projects that are not physically slow, but slow to voucher to us. And those are ones like the GF gym project is one of those category issues that we would cut $100,000 check tomorrow. They just gave us the financial, but a voucher with proof of their expenses for eligible expenses. But we're working on those, and it helps not to have. We don't have an IURA meeting scheduled in July, and we didn't have one in June. Did we have one in June? No, we did have one in June. But we've had a month without committees, essentially. So it's given us a chance to catch up on some things, which has been helpful. But yeah, I guess it's been good. So the grant summary looks in good condition overall. The loan repayments had one late payer, but that was just BSJ Holdings, which is the college town our newest borrower who created the Stella's space, the downstairs Stella's bar, margarita bar type place.
Oh, yeah, right. Right.
And then they get billed once a month by us because they've dispersed part of their funds. So the turnaround time, what I mean to say is the turnaround time is only like 10 days for them by the time they get the bill to the time they get this. So they are now current as we speak. So everybody is current on our loan repayment system right now. And our lease repayments, they have lease repayments. I think only the RIPS program is the only one. All Pro is current. And now Southside Community Center was current as of June, but they didn't make the July payment. And as it relates to Southside Community Center and RIBS, they have informed us that they intend to relocate RIBS back to the Southside Community Center, at least the neighborhood, if not the center itself. But it will take time for that transition to occur. So they are at the end of their 15-year lease. They would like to go a little bit longer to get in place to relocate RIBS. They've had a serious theft problem in a location where they can't keep their eyes on it, and some vandalism, and it's just physically far from their other programs. So they'd like to explore alternatives. It's easy to say it's not a perfect site. It's hard to find a good site. So we'll see how it works out in practice. But it is timely that they're looking at that because we got informed by the city's water and sewer division that they need to replace that pump station at that corner, which is always being repaired, which it looks like they'll need to actually put a pump station either in the backyard or utilize most of that building. So they have to move it out of the street, which is never a good plan. They have a pump station under a driveway on Route 13. So they're going to move it somewhere into that property. The question is, how do they fit it in? It doesn't mean that they couldn't accommodate a use of the building, but it's certainly going to reduce the available space for another user there. And RIBS has historically had a lot of bike storage in the backyard. If you ever poke your eye in, it's just filled with bike cars and bicycles in the backyard. So it's another good reason why it's a good time for them to transition to another location. So that's our paper.
Right.
I just meant to ask earlier, what's going up on Gun Hill? Is that the housing development that was proposed way back when? Or is it?
It's not the first project that was proposed, it's the second project that was proposed, but it's basically similar in scale. It's going to be market rate housing.
Because the height was an issue for a while, right?
I don't know,
Blocking view of the.
yeah, meet zoning, but they also had to meet an agreement with an uphill neighbor,
Right.
not to exceed a certain height. So
Right.
I don't know if you've heard it in your neighborhood, but they've been breaking ledge to get down low enough so they can have underground parking and 3 stories of housing. And it's gonna fit well in the landscape, I think. It's gonna be
Yeah.
successful.
Yeah.
There will be a public access point leading out to what we call the island.
Yeah.
To which will give some views of the valley and some limited views of the waterfall.
Yeah.
So that'll be a public access point, provided
Nice.
there. So it's a
Cool.
good project to finally get. And what's really nice about it is by having to remove ledge to get their site ready, they have clearly removed all the lead contamination that was ever there.
Yeah.
Because they're
They
going
just took all
down
that.
below the bedrock. And
Yeah.
there's still some groundwater issues they have to manage, but
Right.
this, I think we've finally achieved full source removal in that area for those stuff.
That's exciting. That's great.
Any personnel updates?
The only update was just to remind everybody that Charles is remote and that it's working well so far. No, there, and the other positive news is there's no other changes in personnel.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
yeah, no news, it's really good news. Yeah.
Any additional staff report?
I think I covered the main issues. I don't have anything new that jumps up. I just want to have it, there's a placeholder in case there was something new.
Next meeting,
Oh, I know, for the staff report, I was going to share the roster with you, which you have on.
which you have, I was going to bring up, I didn't have an addition that possibly
Just-
we should be thinking about. Try to find.
Yeah, we have one vacancy on this committee and,
You may have. Two.
oh, yeah,
I.
I talked to Susan. I don't know what to do.
Think
with it.
Susan,
A long time.
once.
She seemed to-
I feel like it's been like a year since I've seen.
It's, typically, this is the time of year where she's readying her apartments for lease for the new academic year. So I know she was working on.
But usually she tells you. Anyway, and it wouldn't hurt. To just have more people.
Right.
And even,
So if in doubt, Donna is a member of every committee, almost.
I'm not on in NIC yet.
Yeah, you're on the economic development committee, right? Yeah.
No, I am on.
Oh, no, you are. You're not in the neighborhood investment. Cheyenne's the newest member who's going to get appointed formally at the August 2nd meeting. So she's been serving as the NIC. That will bring us to a full 5. And then when there's a new mayor, then positions can be changed. All members of the agency serve at the pleasure of the mayor, and then all committee members serve at the pleasure of the chairperson of the IRA. There's group currently. So you just want to make sure you're up to date on the membership of committees and where we have vacancies.
so again, does a person who sits have to reside in the city?
No,
They do not.
they do not.
Okay.
And as we now know, in a little research, council members and staff members of the city are eligible to be members of the urban renewal agency. So Donna has now got even another hat as a council member currently, as well as that, which is permissible under law.
Anything else? Great, if people could think of, remember.
Right, it's anticipated that if there is a change in mayor and the mayor wants to become a member of the committee, then we'll see, there'll be, somebody's got to leave to make room for 5 members. And then we'll have to see if that mayor wants to serve on committees or make any other changes, but
So you're basically saying we should probably wait to see what the new,
it's kind of way we've
Yeah,
been thinking.
I mean, we
it's
don't
just
need
like
October anyway.
wait and see where we are at that
We'll see
point.
what the,
Um,
is there,
But it's always nice to have a list of names and possibilities.
I haven't been paying enough attention. There's only one person running for mayor.
Yes, on the Democratic side.
And Janice Kelly is running for as
As
Republican.
Republican. Yeah. So there's.
Right. Anything else?
I gotta run anyway.
All right.
Good to see y'all.
Great,
Mhm.
thank you very much.
Then, I don't know if we need to vote to adjourn, but I vote to
So
adjourn.
moved.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks,
Good to see you.
everyone.
Guys.
Have a good rest of the summer.
Yeah.
You
thanks,
too.
everybody. You too. Okay, you stop the screen.
Stop that.